For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast, or welcome if it's your first time. I am your host, Jade Black, and today I am talking about Charcoal Rain. This is my second novelette I have had published, for those that don't know. This did fly maybe a little under the radar because it came out less than a month after Mr. Nakagami. So I was still in the throes of the Mr. Nakagami marketing campaign, so there was only so much done for this one. I like to do a podcast episode for every release I have. Granted, Mr. Nakagami's one was late, but in that episode I explained fully why. And I really wanted to do one for this one because it was so much fun as a process, and there's so much to it, and I learned so much, but also because it was actually heinously misrepresented on different podcasts. And that's not the fault of the podcast hosts or the organisation behind it. It's just one guest star said some things that were horrifically inaccurate, and I'm going to be honest, I'm still really annoyed about it. Charcoal Rain has been published in SSP's Dreamcourt anthology. And the theme for this anthology is dreams and nightmares. I went firmly on the nightmare side of it for this one. What I wrote is unrelated to the Determined Ones, for what it's worth. It is a 1920s noir, and the idea is it's this nightmare that you can't wake up from. I thought that would be a fun take on the theme. It would be something that was very different to the rest of the anthology as well. When it comes to Shadow Spark anthologies, because everybody in the house is sort of invited every year to take part, and it's our discretion as to whether we do or not, I always try and look and think, is there something I could do that's related to the Determined Ones with this theme, or isn't there? Because I always feel like if I can do something related to the Determined Ones, then I should. But this time, I didn't feel that I had anything particularly solid for that, or at the very least, I didn't come up with an idea in time to give myself enough space to draft it. Charcoal Rain originally was my side project while I was drafting Snakebite. I've talked about this a few times on the podcast, but it's been a while, so what I do when I'm drafting a novel, which is, the Determined Ones, is I'll do one day on, one day off. So I'll be drafting, as it stands at the minute, Beneath the Moon one day, and then the next day I'll be drafting a shorter project on the side, which at the moment is Hypoxemia. So I'll draft that for a day, then I'll go back to Beneath the Moon, then Hypoxemia, so on and so forth. And Charcoal Rain was the one for Snakebite. Sort of. Originally, Charcoal Rain was going to be a full novel-length project, but then Snakebite ended up just taking up so much of my headspace and so much of my time that it ended up getting dropped completely around the 10k mark. And when I was looking back through projects for Dreamcourt to sort of think, what do I have that fits, that's in my sort of bank of ideas, this one sort of jumped out to me, and I thought, does it fit? Does it not? I wasn't really sure. It had been so long since I had touched it because it got dropped very early in Snakebite, and I was drafting Snakebite honestly quite a long time ago now. I was unfamiliar with the content, so I picked it back up and I looked at it and I thought, this isn't really enough story to make into a novel. So I'm actually going to convert this into a novelette because I could just move the ending to where I'm at now. And actually it would just be a really solid, tight story. You know, I edited a couple of scenes to fit that and simplified a couple of things. So, for anybody that's read Charcoal Rain, the scene where it's mentioned that the colleague has invited the main two to dinner, that whole exchange was originally written as a full scene, and that just got cut and relegated to a sort of by-the-by mention instead. And there were a few things I did like that. And honestly, I think it's a much stronger story for having been shorter. And that was sort of an experiment to see if that would work, to take something that was originally a novel concept and put it into something shorter as a format, and it's made me more willing to do that with other old projects of mine. It's something I am looking to do again. But it's not the only thing that's experimental about Charcoal Rain. I've not written noir before. I've talked before about noir and how it's sort of thriller's sad cousin. And it very much is. So I had a lot of ground and experience in a very similar genre, but it's still always an experiment writing a genre or subgenre you've never written before. The first really big point of experimentation, though, is that this is dual POV. It's first person present, as, you know, my stuff usually is, but we got two perspectives. And that was always there, that was always from the original. And when I considered converting this originally, I did think, should I make this single POV? But I've gotten so deep into the project by that point that it actually would have been really difficult to do that and keep it within the word limit, because we were limited to 15k. And to be honest, I didn't really want to go above that anyway. I just didn't think there was enough. I thought if I went much beyond that, if at all, it would have just been bloated. So I thought, let's not do that, let's just stick with what we have. You know, write as little as possible. I only really had to write another 3.5k or so. But I thought it would be really good learning for dual POV, and I really liked the sort of dual POV dynamic that I had, and how I'd made that work, how I'd tackled certain scenes with switching POV, and the sort of effect that I got from that, the intrigue that sort of came from that. I really liked it, and I think, to be honest, that was the biggest factor in not switching, because I didn't want to lose that. I thought that was something I'd actually done really well, so we kept that. Also, experimentally, this is set in the 1920s, and usually I set my stuff in a sort of medieval-ish time period, you know, before electricity. So all of a sudden I'm having to deal with electricity, but also cars and motorbikes and all sorts of other technology that I'm just not used to handling. And cultural difference, and just, you know, the 1920s is such a... I'm gonna nerd out about this because I just love the 1920s. It's such a rich time period. It's such a fascinating time, because there's the hurrah, the First World War is over, but also all the lingering trauma from that. And I don't think I mentioned it's set in America as well, sort of a fictional-ish city that's based roughly on both New York and Chicago. So you get the sort of roaring 20s, but also the lingering shadow of the First World War, and obviously with hindsight, there's the whole looming Second World War as well, and it's just... and, the looming Great Depression as well. It's just such a fascinating time period, and Prohibition has so many interesting dynamics and interesting stories, and it's just such a rich time period, and there's so much you can do with the 1920s and noir and all of that, and part of me wanting to do this so much, and as a result really just loving doing noir and wanting to continue doing it, is because that's what I thought this decade would be. I really thought that the 2020s would be the noir revival, 100 years since Prohibition. It's such an iconic time, 100 years since, sort of almost a noir renaissance. I really thought that's where we were going. And we've ended up with romantasy instead. And that, I know that sounds like really disparaging and gross, and for what it's worth, if you like romantasy, you write romantasy, and it's your favourite thing ever, that's great. By all means, go ahead and enjoy that. If you're enjoying it, that's genuinely, from my heart, awesome. I am not, is the thing. I'm not a fantasy person. I'm not really a romance person either. I mean, I can sort of I've read the odd romance novel, I can get into it, but just, particularly the way romantasy is handled is just... it's really not my bag, and going back to the noir renaissance point, it's about as far from noir as you'll get. And I guess really I'm just disappointed that this is where we've ended up, and it's been so dominant for so long. And noir is it's just so much fun as well. It was so much fun to write. It was a really interesting genre to edit, and I learned so much editing this, and I had to take such a unique approach. I really wanted to talk about this because it's something very different to anything else I've edited. So the number one thing was obviously pacing. Thriller's sad cousin. It's slower than Thriller. You have to sort of linger on moments longer, and that's not something I'm used to doing at all. You have to linger on moments, you have to let the dread hang over, let it creep, let it loom, let it be there. So, sort of doing the pacing, slowing bits down, was really quite strange for me, because I'm used to, right, speed it up, speed it up, speed it up, not slow it down. I mean, I do have an amount of slow it down when I've skipped over things too quickly. It's a bad habit of mine, especially in later stages of drafting where I'm just flying through drafts. But having to do that consistently from genuinely page one was quite a weird experience, actually. And trying to do that without ending up with bloat was really quite difficult, but in the end I'm really happy with where I got. Another factor I found once I'd done this pass on edits was I felt that it didn't actually read that much like noir. And I thought, you know what? Whenever you think about noir, what you think of first and foremost, at least for me, is the aesthetic. Actually, you think about how film noir looks, and the light through the Venetian blinds is the classic. And the trails of cigarette smoke and streetlights. And it got me thinking, I really need that aesthetic detail in there. I really need to focus on descriptions for this, and just little moments where you just see those little details to really sell it. And if you've been on this podcast before, if you've ever listened to an episode, or frankly, really, I talk about this on Twitter too, you know I don't really do descriptions particularly well. That's always the thing that I have to work on the most in edits. It's one of my kryptonites, is description. I don't describe things really at all in first drafts a lot of the time, and my descriptions just are a lot of the time very minimalist. That's partly a stylistic thing, I think that's also a thriller thing, but that wasn't working here. And little moments where you notice little aesthetic details, that's just not something I generally do. So that was honestly probably the most difficult thing for me, which is again maybe not surprising. But the whole, just how to describe things, the sort of language that you use, and trying to get the detail of trails of cigarette smoke and how they move, and light through Venetian blinds, because you just have to have that in noir. It's a beautiful thing, I love it. And flickering streetlights and all these things. I love noir aesthetic, I always have done. My eyes are broken, and it's one of the things I can actually trust myself to see properly these days as well, so that's an influence, but I've always loved noir aesthetic, so actually doing that and incorporating that fully, even though it was really difficult and in many ways really frustrating, it was also really fun and really satisfying. I'm really glad I pushed myself as hard as I did with that. And part of that push, and this was a really, really weird little detail I found, was the interaction of colour and light. I was just thinking, actually, in a couple of places I've described colours. This is noir. This is film noir, this is black and white. We can't be doing that. We can't be describing colours of objects. We can't be describing, how a room looks in terms of colours. We need to describe the light in the room. And when it comes to colours and textures, you swap colours for textures as well. A couple of active edits I made was at one point, my two main characters are walking through this sort of city park. It's sort of modelled on New York Central Park. And it's autumn, because apparently I've set everything in autumn. That's a genuine thing I've noticed. But the leaves are swirling around. They're, falling leaves are swirling around, and I described them in the first draft as auburn and orange and red, and I immediately thought, oh no, we can't have colours, this is film noir. So I swapped that for papery. You can see that in the published work that it's papery leaves, and there's another point where a bit of a room is cordoned off because there's some blood on the floor, and I realised I couldn't describe that the blood was red, and I couldn't describe necessarily even that there's blood, because that immediately associates with red, so I had to describe the cordon instead. And it's little details like that that really truly sell it, and there's actually more of that than you might think, because it's such an instinctive thing to describe colour. And that was just genuinely so much fun. I love line edits, I love picking up on stuff like this, and it's probably something that, anybody reading it wouldn't notice. But the only colours I've actually used are black, white and grey. I'm not convinced I've even used all three of those. I know I've definitely used black, but that sort of detail on another read-through of the passage really helps sell that it's noir. And I just thought that was really neat. This time round with the anthology, the word count was handled very differently. with the last anthology, Cozy-ish, we were given a band in which our story had to be in, which enforced it to be a novelette. This time we were just given a maximum. So I could have done really anything as long or short as I wanted to, up into the length of Charcoal Rain. But I really wanted to go longer because I love novelettes. Having never done it before Cozy-ish, they're really, really fun. They're a really good length for trying something new and getting a proper grasp of it without the commitment of writing something really long. It sort of scratches that short fiction itch without it being really short. So it's a really good way to experiment, but you get that same level of learning and experimentation in edits too. So you get the full benefit of experimentation in long form, and the skills are then transferable and you can transfer it shorter. It's just a really nice length to tell a decently long, decently complex story. It's just really fun, and they're pretty quick to bang out as well. And it's the approach I've taken, really, for much of what I'm calling the full house. And I'm going to be doing an entire separate episode on that because it's complicated. And it's a solution to something I've been trying to work out for a very long time, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And also keep your eyes peeled for more noir from me. You know, my one-woman mission to have the noir renaissance. I do have one other noir novelette hard concepted at this point. And, I mean, I've just enjoyed doing Charcoal Rain so much. Everything from the setting to drafting that sort of story and editing and the detail of edits. I cannot tell you enough times how much I love the aesthetic detail and edits for this. I had so much fun with it. I mean, I'm going to be doing this again at least once, probably a lot. Noir is something that I think I'm really well suited to, naturally. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this episode and enjoyed the return to the podcast. Charcoal Rain is published and available now in Shadowspark's Dreamcourt, which is technically our biggest anthology yet. It's not our highest page count, but it's our biggest number of authors that have taken part, and it's got a really broad theme, and honestly I think it's a really fun anthology. And I do highly recommend reading it because there are some seriously talented authors that are part of it. I've also had a previous novelette published in Cozy-ish. I've alluded to that in this episode a couple of times. That is called Count the Stars. That's a sort of cozy slice of life piece that sort of serves as a preview to the Determined Ones, and the main character of that is Isamu, our 8th Determined One. And of course, my debut novel is also out now. That is Mr. Nakagami, the political thriller, the first published book in the Determined Ones, Haru Nakagami's cinnamon roll himself. His story has been told. So if you're interested in any of those, there will be links in the description to that. There will also be links to find me elsewhere and all the various other platforms I'm on to various different degrees. Instagram really is the podcast home. It's where you get advance notice of what the episode of the week is, and a couple of little fun things on there every now and then. I never really know what I'm doing with Instagram. I'm there fairly regularly, but if you're into the podcast, that's the place you want to be. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. If you like to hear about my writing, see, basically live what I'm up to, I do writing updates pretty much every morning, and I also host the monthly Thrills prompts over on Twitter. So if any and all of that appeals to you, I'm JadeBlack21 on there. The other place I'm most active is Pinterest. That's where I put all my art stuff. There are also a whole load of snippets from Mr. Nakagami and a whole load of art for Mr. Nakagami on there on various boards, which is honestly just really just fun to check out. So I'm Jade_Black21 on there as well. And Blue Sky is my game dev platform. I have not made any time for game dev in a very long time, and otherwise I just don't really use the platform, but you can follow me on there if you would like to. Maybe I'll come back at some point, I don't know. I'm JadeBlack21 on there. But if you are published or well on the way, please do get in touch. I am jade42black@gmail.com. You can email me and I can interview you about your book. It doesn't have to be a full-length novel. Novellas are more than welcome. Short story collections, an anthology piece if you want to talk about it like I have done today. Whatever you've got, bring it in and I'll see what I can do. If you are indie and self-published, indie or self-published, you are the people I want to hear from. TradPub, I will consider you. I am going to prioritise dark lit, so that's horror, mystery, thriller, etc. Because indie dark lit is... because there are so few spaces for indie dark lit, indie fantasy has a really easy time in comparison. So, you know, I'm trying to be the change I want to see. But before you contact me, please do check the list in the description to make sure you include all that information so that everything is just easier, it all works a bit smoother, and I can make sure that this podcast is the right fit for you. But until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like, or commenting, or subscribing. It really does help the channel a lot. All music is done by me. Copyright Jade Black 2025.